Kunja Bihari Jashodhanandana Vajajanaranjana Jashodhanandana Vajajanaranjana Chamuna Tiravana Chari Chamuna Tira Vanachari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Shishi Radha Madhava Ki Jai Antaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Go Premanandi Hari Hari Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pachari Nirvisesa Sanyavare Paschatya Satarine Panchakapa Turubhyascha Krapashandubhye Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Now if you look behind me, you see on my right shoulder behind me, there's a plant. It's got some yellow leaves because it didn't get watered for the last 2.5 weeks. We're trying to, some leaves are still green. I'm hopeful. And the other plant also is having you have to water plants in case you have plants. And you go away, someone has to water them. Yes. We're supposed to care for all living entities. So care for your plants, make sure. So Rasika, you're going to translate? Is that the plan? Yeah, okay.
Yes, good.
Okay. Hare Krishna. So on Monday, we talked about renunciation that may not be renunciation. And in spiritual life, sometimes something looks like something, but it's not what it looks like. Which would mean it's something external that one is doing, but internally there is not realization or there is not the internal strength to maintain it. So sometimes it's difficult to understand because externally it looks the same. And one example that we've talked about before, and this question always comes up, is distinguishing low self-esteem from humility, because in many ways they can look the same. But internally what's going on is much different. Low self-esteem is a weakness which causes one to need, to want, and sometimes to absolutely need the appreciation and honor of others. Because you have such little yourself, for yourself. You want to get built up by getting it from others. And Prabhupada says that pride means the desire to get the pleasure of being honored by others. So it's actually completely the opposite thing, but externally it could look exactly like the same thing. So of course, this makes us realize that if it's external, we have to then check internally. Is it aligned internally? Is it real? If it's not, sometimes the external can help if we're aware that we don't have it internally, but we're doing it externally to develop internally. So that's okay. But if we mistake it for what it is, then it's a problem. Now, something really, really interesting is there in the Shastras about humility and pride, around the idea that when one becomes renounced, and this is a complete paradox, maybe one of the biggest paradoxes, when one becomes renounced, they become proud of their renunciation. So it's an obvious paradox, because if you're renounced, you would be renounced from false ego and the need to be praised, right? So, but what this verse says, it says one may be renounced from everything, but not renounced from pride. Interesting, right? And in fact, sometimes people will do bhakti and do austerity in order to become recognized. There's a song by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and he takes the part of a devotee doing this. He said, "You are sitting in a holy place chanting, but why are you chanting? You want the recognition of others." Because in India, if you sit and chant all day, you could get a lot of recognition. Haridas Thakur, for example, or the prostitute that he turned over his ashram to, she became quite famous. Rightly so, but you could do it to become famous. So you can do your bhajan, your renunciation, for the wrong reason. So it's just something that we have to be aware of. You know, you have to be aware of, why am I doing something? What's going on internally? And when we block out the internal self-awareness, that's when we run into trouble. And so we have been discussing, but we were discussing on Monday how renunciation can be a means of renouncing things that we need to face. So in the name of I'm renounced, I don't have to face something that I should face. Because sometimes we see this with premature renunciation. If someone wants to take a position, either as a sannyasi or a woman at a young age may put on white. Not that all sannyasis have this trouble or all women would have this trouble, but sometimes it's done prematurely. So when they're older, they end up with a girlfriend or a boyfriend in secret, because it's too embarrassing to admit to the world that that's their desire. But the problem was they weren't aware of that. There wasn't enough self-awareness to understand that they had that desire. And by taking the role of renunciation, it's like saying, okay, I don't have it. I don't have to deal with it. I don't have to go there. When in fact, it comes from behind and gets you, but you actually should have dealt with it, should have understood it, and should have dealt with it properly, the proper ways to be married. I'm just saying this because recently I heard a story about a sannyasi and his girlfriend. So it made me think, obviously he should have been married. So, but that also probably, in some cases, they're not ready for renunciation, but they're not ready to be married either. But Prabhupada always said, do the austerity of marriage if you're not renounced. That's how you become purified. But not wanting to deal with it, we can take shelter of renunciation that we don't have. And so, and that way, we avoid what we should be dealing with. Now, this isn't to say that some people can't be renounced on a very high level, and it's not to say that people who are renounced are running away from things. But really, a person who is renounced is so renounced that they're not going to renounce the things that they have to deal with. That kind of renunciation is obviously foolish. So if you see a person who's very renounced, it doesn't mean that they're running away. If they're truly renounced, they're renounced enough from their own false ego that they can honestly assess themselves of their own faults and not run away from them, but deal with them. And if they're actually renounced, they're humble. And so in their humility, they can admit their own faults and where they need to improve. Now, something that's a big danger sign in spiritual life. This sounds weird, but I think we all have experience of this. So then maybe it won't sound so weird. The more you progress in spiritual life, the more temptation there is to become proud of your spiritual advancement. And now we would think that as you become more advanced, you would become more humble, more of a servant, more of one who praises others, honors others. You would think, right? But sometimes we follow the opposite. The opposite happens. And there may be different reasons for that. But in my study of the topic of humility and pride, it's probably generally a lingering desire for recognition that was never extinguished. And so when you're now, you could say this for any desire, when you're now in a position where that desire becomes triggered by the environment, it then manifests. You know, like women, it's said that women bring out the lust in a man. So a man may be fine, then he sees a beautiful woman and this lust comes out. Of course, the lust was there within him. It was environmental. Now sees a beautiful woman, or a woman sees a beautiful man. So something similar like that. The desire to be honored is there. The devotee's been controlling it. And now he's in a position where people are honoring him and he's taking advantage of it. Or he's in a position where if he makes the right move, he or she will be honored. Or honor comes as you advance and you've never had that much honor and you like it and you start enjoying it. So that's something that I think most devotees in their beginnings of Krishna consciousness would not expect to happen. And strange things happen, I would say, after being a devotee 7, 8, 9 years. There was a movie called The 7-Year Itch. I had a godbrother who said, the 7th year, that's the tough one. So I don't know, those of you who've passed the 7-year, if you agree, but you know, we see a lot of devotees don't make it past the 10th, 7th, or 10th year. And not just because of pride, but there could be many reasons. But when you get in a position where now you're considered senior, older, more advanced, or you feel yourself more advanced, there's this temptation to run with that. And so one of the huge paradoxes, now I know the philosophy really well. So before I wasn't sure if I was right, but now I know I'm right. And that means you're wrong. So let's get ready to fight. These kinds of things will come up. And it may even be true that you actually are right. But there's the temptation to make another wrong, to use that position to promote oneself as above others. So what's supposed to happen as we progress, if it's healthy, is that we will find ourselves praising devotees more, appreciating devotees more, and feeling ourselves that we're not actually making advancement, that we are full of contamination, and there's so many things that we need to improve in ourselves. That's the natural, that's the way it should progress. It doesn't always progress that way. And it's not always purely a spiritual problem. As we've discussed, sometimes psychology gets in there. So if I have low self-esteem, there'll be a tendency to need that honor. So when I'm in a position where, let's say I have this need to be loved, which was never fulfilled, or maybe it was fulfilled, but my need for it, my lust for love is so intense that when I'm in a position where I'm being appreciated, that becomes a form of sense gratification. Because it's a psychological need, I need to be loved, I depend on, I need you to glorify me, honor me, and so forth. If I'm in a healthy state, then as I advance, I use my position to serve. And when people glorify me, it humbles me because I feel, no, I'm not qualified. It's not, no. Okay, you're glorifying me. That's your duty. Glorify the devotees. We should glorify one another. So I can recognize that. But I don't believe it. And I just feel like, okay, you're saying these things about me. I need to become like this. That's the healthy way to deal with it. You say I'm great. I need to become great. You say I'm determined. I need to become determined. That's how we see it. And I see you and say, no, well, you actually are such a great devotee because you're seeing the good in me before I even see it. So that means you're humble. So that's the healthy way to take it if we're progressing. So, it's good to know these signposts as you go, because one signpost may be green. Good, keep going. One may be red. Stop. This is a red flag. It shouldn't be this way. So that's important. So then you can reflect. Otherwise, you just drive through the red light, and you ever drive through a red light and not know it? And someone in the car says, "You just drove through a red light." Oh my God, I didn't know. So in spiritual life, we could be driving through lots of red lights and not seeing them. And so this discussion about spiritual bypassing is in this context of not being aware of what's actually happening. And so if we look at ourselves and say, okay, am I now this year feeling more of a desire to appreciate devotees than last year? Is my tendency to criticize, has that been reduced? Or have these things increased? And if they've increased, I know there's a tendency to say, well, but I'm justified. And I'm not saying you're not, but I'm saying it's not always justifiable. Sometimes, obviously, it is. Some things have to be criticized. And how can you appreciate a devotee who just ran off with $10,000 from the temple? I mean, you can appreciate what he's done in the past, good, and so forth. So obviously, I'm just talking about in general, where it's kind of more neutral, where you could go either way. It's not like, well, this devotee is, he's so pure, like naturally you appreciate him. Okay, that was easy. He's got everything appreciable. And this devotee is so bad, there's nothing to appreciate. He stole $10,000. He cheated on his wife, etc. Okay, but those are exceptions. But in general, you look back and see, okay. When I see devotees, do I feel a bit humbled, respectful, appreciative? Wow, you're a great devotee. You know so many shlokas, or you come to Mangalarti every day, or you've been a devotee a long time, or your service is amazing, and feel humbled by that. Oh, I wish I could be like you. Are you feeling that? That's a good sign. If you're feeling like, why are people praising her instead of me? Not a good sign. That can be due to a lack of spiritual advancement, or it could be due to low self-esteem, a psychological problem. But whatever it is, it's good to be aware of it, right? Isn't it? Because those are the red lights that I say, oh, red light, let's stop and look at this and see if we can solve it and get back on the road of the green lights. So just be aware that spiritual advancement, it's interesting because you could be advancing in certain aspects of your spiritual life while you're going back in others. And it gets a little bewildering, because if you look at the areas, let's say I'm not, I'm eating much more simply than I used to eat. And I'm studying a lot, and I don't watch movies, I don't read novels. And fantastic, that's good. So you see you're making progress. But what about other things? Well, I say I'm more impersonal with devotees. I'm less sympathetic to their suffering. My relationship with my spouse is getting worse. I'm not thinking about the conditioned souls as much. So it's not 360 degrees because you master it in some way. It's going to be good in every way. And sometimes we think that, well, we might look at what we're doing well. Not that we shouldn't, but don't think that means you're doing well everywhere. Not necessarily. I was reading this morning a conversation about a disciple of Srila Prabhupada who was a Sanskrit scholar who left Prabhupada and took shelter of, or was in the line of some Babajis that Prabhupada said these Babajis were Kanishna Adhikaris and highly criticized by Bhaktisiddhanta. So not a good move. And in Prabhupada's response, we find Prabhupada he was revealing the essence of his mission, because he was criticizing this devotee for sitting in Radha Kund. And he said, but what have, this is Mahaprabhu's mission to go out and preach. What have these, not to minimize the advancement of the Babajis, but what have they done to spread Mahaprabhu's movement? Despite all their other good qualities. So it's an example of there may be so much good, but then something which is essentially important is neglected. So we want to be 360 in our analysis of ourselves and understanding what does Prabhupada want from us? What does holistic spiritual life look like? Sometimes we find, I think this is more true amongst men than women, sometimes we find a man is very involved in spreading Krishna consciousness, very good preacher, very good example, very knowledgeable, and his family life is a complete mess. This is not uncommon. It's that the preaching is important, the family life isn't, or by nature is just not good in family life. May not understand women, may not really relish it, or maybe married for the wrong reason, something like that. So then it's easy to write that off. Well, that's just Grihastha life anyway. Who cares? It's not that important. But it is important because it's a relationship with another devotee, and relationships are important. Or maybe we can expand it to something even more common. I'm doing a lot of service, but all around me are my life is sprinkled with bad relationships. So, it's easy to think, but I'm doing all this service, and these other people, they just have problems. They don't like me, they're envious or whatever. But it's not wise to think that way. Think holistically. Okay, I'm doing this. What about my relationships? Or you're not healthy. You didn't take care of yourself. Like that. So that's the introduction to today's class. Hare Krishna. Now I'm going to bring up, let me say one more thing. It was when Prabhupada was analyzing this disciple who went to Radha Kund, his idea was to live there, and he had taken shelter of the Babajis in Radha Kund, and Prabhupada said, well, what have they done for Mahaprabhu's movement? Quite a significant point, because it's not that these Babajis can't chant day and night, bhajan, japa, and so forth. But Prabhupada's making a point that they missed the most essential point, that this is the heart of Mahaprabhu. And as I was reading it, it became obvious, although Prabhupada wasn't saying it this way, but it became obvious that Prabhupada had entered into the heart of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, knowing that this is the mission to spread Krishna consciousness around the world. And so when Prabhupada was analyzing the desire of this devotee to live in Radha Kund, by reading it, you see very clearly this disciple had completely neglected that whole point, that to become dear to Krishna, dear to Prabhupada, dear to Mahaprabhu, help others become Krishna conscious. He was just going to Radha Kund just to chant. And Prabhupada had condemned it, as I said, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had condemned, not chanting, but chanting where you don't give Krishna consciousness, you just sit, and that's what you do. You cultivate your own, you don't share it. That's been condemned. Not that we don't have sadhana, but the main activity of the Vaishnavas now in Kali Yuga, sadhana can go 4 or 5 hours. You have the rest of the day, at least another 8-10 hours for working. That work is done to spread Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada was emphasizing that. As I was reading that, I was thinking, okay, maybe this devotee could chant 64 rounds. And he was quite a scholar, but so much for his scholarship now, he missed the main point. So, it's not just, okay, I read all the books and I understand. There's a whole philosophy. But this point is central, and many people missed it. And it requires dedication to Guru, to understanding the heart of the Guru, the heart of the mission. It's not just a philosophical idea in and of itself. It's also coming through the disciplic succession from the heart of Mahaprabhu, the compassion, through the acharyas being handed over. And so Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he took it from Bhaktivinoda and he spread it and prayed for someone who could spread it around the world. That was his desire. So that's the heart, that's the essence. If you miss all that and everything else is good, you've kind of missed everything. You've missed the mission that Prabhupada came for, and you've missed your connection with Prabhupada. Of course, I'm not saying deity worship or other services are not preaching. It's all spreading Krishna consciousness, maintaining temples and managing and so forth. But sometimes you need someone on Prabhupada's level to just say, no, not this, this. Don't forget this. This is the essence. This we have to keep our eye on. This is what it's all about. Okay. So that's also an important evaluation. Compassion. Am I thinking about people who don't have Krishna consciousness? Am I thinking how to give it to them? Am I thinking how I can expand upon what I'm doing? And not only thinking, do I feel, like Anurada was, before we started, was saying, how bad things are and how much people are suffering. Do we feel that to the point that it motivates us to try to give people Krishna consciousness? That's what really essentially Prabhupada was giving us, the heart of the Vaishnava, which is compassion. So I could actually study my way right out of compassion. I could get so theoretical and philosophical and so renounced that my heart could become immune to compassion and more focused on saving myself, which is, of course, Prabhupada's criticism of Mayavadis and other spiritual practitioners who are focused on their own salvation. And in that context of discussion, it's just like Prabhupada writes it off. This is not real spiritual life. Even though they're austere, even though they're transcendentalist, they can be honored and appreciated for that, which Prabhupada does in other contexts. But in this context, more or less, he pushes that aside and said, what's the point? This is not real spiritual life. So, there's much to think about, but if you study Prabhupada's books, if you study his biographies, it becomes very clear what is the mission, what does Prabhupada want from us? And it's not that difficult to do it. Hare Krishna. Okay, so you can digest that for a minute while I bring up the file for today's class. If I can find it. Yes. Okay. Ta-da. Okay. Kind of in the middle of this article, so okay. I'll just begin reading. As I said on Monday, I've noted some points. There's a few more pages left. Here's a question. How do you know when you're indulging or wallowing in feelings? In other words, wallowing in, we talked about not ignoring your feelings, but wallowing in feelings can be very, very self-centered. Poor me, poor me. answer. That question always comes up. Wallowing in feelings is being stuck in fixation, fed by going over and over stories in your mind. Unconditional presence, on the other hand, is about opening nakedly to a feeling instead of becoming caught up in stories about the feeling. So this is interesting. This is quite a Buddhist concept, but I think it's not alien to our philosophy. And this is also a key point of psychology. If you don't know a lot about psychology and you understand this one point, it helps you tremendously. The point is stories, and stories are what we tell ourselves about what happened. And if you know anything about trauma, we all experience trauma, but deeper traumas. I mean, taking birth was a trauma. Living without Krishna was a trauma. Just being in the material world is quite a trauma in itself. So we all experience traumas. If the traumas are more intense, it doesn't mean we'll be traumatized by them. And if the traumas are not intense, it doesn't mean we won't be. So what's interesting is, this is like very, very interesting. What determines how traumatized you are by an event? Like Prabhupada left, that was a traumatic event. But some people are traumatized more, some less. It's your experience of that event, not actually what happened. So, the stories around it will affect your experience of something. And so the stories you tell yourself create your experience. So sometimes people will have not such a bad experience, but it's traumatizing because of how they're perceiving it and experiencing it. And a big event may not traumatize someone as much as a small event because they weren't affected much by it, or how they saw it, what they said about it didn't affect them so much. So what's being discussed here is about feelings from the past. So in Buddhism is it's trying to help people. One of the things Buddhism does is try to get you beyond duality, which is also what Krishna is doing in Bhagavad Gita. So it is relevant. It's just where it ends, nirvana, beyond duality. For us, that's just a platform from which we launch ourselves into bhakti. But in Buddhism, they have a practice which is nice, which is you look at something and you don't make a judgment on it, you just look at it. So the problem being, and it's not that good judgments are not welcome, but the problem is you may look at something and you have a very negative judgment on it. And what's being referred to here is you're looking at something from the past. So you've got this negative judgment on it. So you've got this negative story. And the story has stayed with you and it's had negative consequence. So in Krishna consciousness, we would try to look at it and say, okay, say something like, okay, it's my karma. I should learn from it. This is Krishna's mercy. I have to see why Krishna's doing this. We put a different story on it. It neutralizes any negative, So if you look at Shastra, Shastra is giving you a way to look at life through stories that would uplift you rather than stories that would degrade you. And we often tend to interpret through stories that I'm so bad, or why did this happen to me, or this is always going to happen, or or whatever, I'm so hurt, I can't get over it. So if it's like an example, you rub your hands together, right? Once you rub your hands together and then just see how it feels. So does it feel soft? Does it feel hard, harsh, callous? Sandpaper, silk, oil, nails? What does it feel like? Depends on the cream you've been or haven't been using, right? Now, rub your hands together and just feel how it feels, but don't put words to it. Just feel. There's no words. Isn't that interesting? You just did a Buddhist exercise. You had an experience, but you didn't give it a name. So it was just, you were just experiencing it without a name. Isn't that interesting? So you have an experience, you give it a name, bad. Now it's a bad experience. We would say, okay, it's an experience. Go with the feeling. What can you learn from it? But don't name it as something bad, because that's when you start reliving this, past. Because everything's connected with the past. Can you just feel it and let that feeling educate you as to how to go forward without making a judgment on it? Or can you see it through the eye of Shastra in some way as a blessing, some way as a learning experience, rather than create a negative emotion which will just harm yourself? Now, when I was in Ecuador, a question was asked about something like this. What was the question about? Maybe like overcoming negative feelings about oneself. And so one point I was making is that if you want to be Krishna conscious, really, if you want to do anything, but of course our goal is to be Krishna conscious. If you want to be Krishna conscious, you want to eliminate anything which is unfavorable. This is one of the symptoms of surrender. There are 6 symptoms of surrender. And one is to eliminate anukulasya sankalpa, partikulasya varjanam. One is to do what's favorable and not what's unfavorable. So let's apply this to our own internal process, what's going on in our mind, in our heart, in our feelings. Let's say I have a thought or a feeling, which is, I'm so bad, what's the use? Why be a devotee? I'll just keep messing up. I'll never be perfect. One of those fantastic thoughts. And the icing on that, you're stupid and you're a loser anyway. All right. You ever have one of those thoughts? One of those combo sandwiches? They kind of go together, right? Like, I don't want to say bacon, lettuce, and tomato, but vegan, bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich. They go together. And the sauce, just, you're a stupid idiot, loser. So if I want to become Krishna conscious, obviously those thoughts are against how I'm going to progress. Because if I have those thoughts, I'll be completely discouraged and I'll give up. So what we want to do to apply this principle of do what's favorable is think, what would be a favorable way to process what I'm feeling? So, okay, this is the feeling. I'm rubbing my hands, but there's no words right now. It's just a feeling. How do you feel? Feel it without giving it a word. That's not always easy, right? How does it feel? Is this, okay, feels, oh, just feel it. All right. Now, how could I create something favorable in my mind, in my emotional being, so it would help me become Krishna conscious? That's what we're supposed to do. And so often we do the opposite. We do the unfavorable. I'll never be successful. What's the use? And the beautiful thing about Krishna consciousness is those unfavorable thoughts and feelings have no support in our Shastra. There's nowhere you can go to our Shastra that would validate that kind of feeling. But you could go in our Shastra and validate so many positive feelings, at least hopeful feelings, encouraging feelings. Like, okay, so let's say I failed. It's a feeling, right? But what would be a positive way to process it? Oh, failure is a pillar of success. I can learn from this. I'm not perfect. Everybody fails. This could be a great opportunity to go forward. That's another way of processing it, right? Did Prabhupada condemn anybody for failing? No, he just asked them, to go forward with what you've learned from this. What are you going to do? And say, okay, I've learned something. Now I have this experience, which can help me go forward in my life. I have a long life ahead. There's much to learn. I'm just beginning. That's positive. And so that will be encouraging, right? So sorry that I look like a 1920s movie. I have no control over this crazy internet. I don't know. Maybe I just shouldn't move. So then when it freezes, you won't know that I had a godbrother, actually. He sat so still giving class, it was like a photograph. He was very calm. So meditate on this concept, like whatever is going on in your heart and your mind. And always try to put yourself in a favorable situation. Now, one time a devotee had a very bad experience. I think he broke one of regulative principles. He was a brahmachari. Something of that nature. He was really, really discouraged. And I learned to ask a question, which is a very interesting question. When something bad happens, the question I ask is, what's good about it? Which is the last thing on your mind, because there's seemingly nothing good about it. So I said, what's good about it? And he had to think, well, I've learned, I'll never do that again, et cetera, et cetera. So when we finished the conversation, he was actually quite inspired. And so that's my point. Whatever happens, turn it around so it can become positive, so it can inspire you. Because if you lose your inspiration, where's your energy to go on? When Maya sees you don't have inspiration, he goes, oh, there's Tanya. She's lost her inspiration. Okay, let's go after her. She'll be an easy to knock off. That's when you're Maya's bait, when you lose your enthusiasm. And we could even say Maya is trying to destroy enthusiasm. So at least that's the practice I've always adopted, always putting my mind, my beliefs, my consciousness, my heart, my feelings, adjusting them in turning all the dials that say Krishna conscious. Okay, turn your feeling dial to Krishna conscious, your mind dial, your attitude dial, your belief dial, turn it all. And when it's all lined up in Krishna consciousness, then it's all favorable. Then you go forward. But if I wallow in, oh, I'm so bad, woe is me, everybody hates me, what's the use? That's your interpretation. That's just a story. Don't you have a better story than that? Can't you come up with a better story? You can. But if you're going to come up with that other story is going to be the unfavorable that you're supposed to avoid. But then sometimes we magnify the unfavorable. So, so many bad things happened to us in the past. Sometimes I think about my past and I think, why couldn't I have been born in Vrindavan? It would have been a lot easier. But is there any use in thinking like that? Before class today, I was thinking, we have so many advantages. We are so fortunate. I was reading about Prabhupada this morning, and just reading about Prabhupada, I was thinking, like, how many people have a spiritual master like that? Like what, how many people have books about Prabhupada they can read and have the process that he gave and the clear path that he gave? Like, what fortune we have. So what do you think is better for me to think? I'm so fortunate to have Prabhupada's service, or I'm so unfortunate that I wasn't born in Vrindavan. I wasn't born in Vrindavan. Look at me. What hope is there? I'll never be a pure devotee. I'll have to come back in my next life. What can I do? I retire, everyone. It's the last class. It's over. I'm moving in a cave and I'm just going to cry till I die. Is that a good idea? What do you think? Yeah. You ever feel like that? Find a local cave, get in and cry. So, I can guarantee you one thing. If Prabhupada were here and you had to report to him, you would never do that. Never, never, never. Because you would know if you did that, Prabhupada would look at you and say, what's wrong? Why are you doing that? Well, this is not Krishna consciousness. You may have 108 reasons why, but imagine sitting in front of Prabhupada and trying to explain to him why you're doing that. You would never. You couldn't explain it because you wouldn't have any good reason. And you wouldn't even, if you were smart, you wouldn't try to explain it. You would always, despite all those reasons, you would find reasons that would inspire you to continue, right? So do what's favorable. Find reasons to inspire you. Avoid what's unfavorable. Those unfavorable thoughts, feelings, either just dump them in the trash bin, or you can't throw away your feelings, but use those to promote you. Okay, I failed. I did this. It's a bad feeling. How can I use that to push myself forward? You can. Of course you can. How can I push myself forward because of my failure? Of course you can. In fact, there's some things you may never, ever learn in your life if you don't fail. I just heard this other thing the other day. What is it? Fail. Does anyone know this statement? Fail fast and something forward. I don't know. There's something. It starts fail fast. In other words, fail a lot because you'll succeed. So we're not afraid of failing. If we're afraid of failing, why did Prabhupada send 20-year-olds around the world to open temples? Did he think they were like not going to make mistakes? No, he knew they would. He knew they would learn. So failing is not a failure unless you give up. If you fail, you learn, you go forward. Pretty soon you become expert. And if you think you're bad because you fail, you're normal because you fail. But try to understand that. Have you ever done something stupid? We all have, and we all will. That's the nature. You're not stupid because you do something stupid. You're just normal. So it's important to understand that. If you fail, you're normal. Or if you do something stupid, you're normal. But we're trying to improve. That's all. Correcto. I had this little joke in Ecuador. I would make statements like that, and I would say, "Isn't that simple?" And everybody would say, "Yeah, it's simple." And I'd say, "Yeah, it just took me 52 years to figure that one out." And I would go down these list of simple points, but very profound, extremely helpful. And then I would always end, "Yeah, it's so simple. It only took me 52 years to figure it out." It's a good title for a book, right? You want to be my ghostwriter, Tanya? Every simple point I ever make, you just write it down. So simple, it only took me 52 years to figure it out. Or I could say 71 now. Yeah. What I can say that might be encouraging, that you will figure out many things in your life when you're older, and you'll think, why did it take me so long to figure it out? And the answer is because it did. There's no other answer. But at least you figured it out. So you don't want to give up Krishna consciousness, because then if you figure it out, you're not a devotee anymore. So what's the use? So at least stay in Krishna consciousness. So when you do figure it out, you have it, and you can win the race. Maybe not right now, but later in your life. Hare Krishna. Does that make sense? If it doesn't make sense, get the recording and listen to it again. Okay. So you have a feeling and you have stories about the feeling, And the point of the discussion we've had so far is your stories should be uplifting. Fail fast, learn fast. Oh, okay, got it. Fail fast, learn fast. Thank you. Fail fast, learn fast. Yeah. Fail fast, learn fast. Okay. Who's going to write the song? So I've said this before in relation to forgiveness, in relation to resentment, because resentment is a story about what happened. It's just a story of resentment. You could have a story of forgiveness about the same event, right? And so when you go through a forgiveness process, you end up with a story of forgiveness. The event didn't change. Obviously, it already happened. It's just your story changed. Your story changes, and all of a sudden, your experience of that event has changed. You don't hate everybody now. You're okay. It's not like a big deal anymore. It was such a big deal. You hated the universe. How could God do this to you? How could my brother do this? How could this cousin say that? And you were living with that in your heart. You went through the forgiveness process, rewrote the story, and now all of a sudden everything's fine, like nothing happened. Isn't that weird? But that's how it is. So now if you look at your life and you have any story that's negatively impacting you, try to rewrite the story so it positively impacts you. Because if you carry a negative story, it's just carrying weight on your shoulder unnecessarily. It's making your life difficult. My favorite story, one of my favorite stories in the Bhagavatam that I've told many times, but it's such a good example of stories. That Ambarish Maharaj and Durvasa Muni tries to kill him because he drank water before breakfast. That's kind of a good reason to kill somebody. What do you think? So not a good reason to kill somebody because they drank water before they fed you. Anyway, long story short, Durvasa almost dies due to the reaction of trying to kill Ambarish. Comes back and asks forgiveness. And Ambarish says, "Get out of here. I don't want to see your ugly face." No, he didn't say that. He comes back, he apologizes. Ambarish says three things. Don't worry about it. It wasn't no big thing. Let's have breakfast. What is Ambarish Maharaj's story? Like, how could this sadhu try to kill me? Who does he think he is? So-called sadhu. All I did was break my fast with water. I didn't even eat. It said, that's one story. And the other story is, he's a sadhu. Let's serve the sadhu. Different response. Okay. You're sitting there thinking, there's no way if someone tried to kill me, I could feed them breakfast and forget it. Okay. I know. I couldn't either. But I could rewrite the story. Well, Durvasa, he's got quite a temper. He's an expansion of Lord Shiva. It's to be expected. But we as devotees, we have to learn to be tolerant. So just let's let it go. And let us live our life happy that we can serve Prabhupada. And, just be happy I'm alive. Krishna saved me. What a blessing. That's another story, right? So I love that story because that's a hard story to change, isn't it? But Maharaj Ambarish never even went there, right? He never even went to the negative. He didn't even have to change it to something positive. But I'm just saying, you can change any negative thing to positive. And, if somebody is, harming you, whatever, so bless his heart. It's the best he can do. It's what he's going through. And, I'm not going to ruin my life because of this person, something like that. You ever heard the saying, when somebody harms you and you want to forgive them, one of the ways you do it is you realize that was about the best they could do. Like they couldn't do any better. In this life, at this time, in who they are, what they've gone through, what they understand, what their needs are, etc. That was about as best they could do. Or what did they do? They screamed and yelled at me for 20 years. That was about the best they could do. You go, okay, I forgive him because couldn't have done any better anyway, right? So sometimes that's just the rewriting of the story. Well, that's just what they do, Hare Krishna. It requires some detachment. We can't control everyone and everything. So it's not always easy. But as you've often heard me said, although this is not easy, it's more difficult not to do this. However difficult this is, your life will be more difficult if you don't do it. So rewriting your story so it gives you enthusiasm to go forward, it's very important. You agree? If you don't know anything else about how the mind works and you just know this is probably going to cover you most of the time in any difficulties you have with your mind and emotions. And just, okay, I have this feeling, but let's not judge it negatively. How can we go forward in a positive way? Be favorable. That's the key word. Do what's favorable for bhakti. Because if you don't, you trap yourself, you paint yourself against a wall, and you're the one who put yourself in prison and threw away the key, because of your story. It's not because of what happened. It's because of the interpretation of what happened. That's interesting, isn't it? You remember what I said about trauma? It's not what happened. It's the experience you have. So it might have been a little thing and a big, heavy experience because of what you told yourself. Now you're traumatized by an event that maybe most people wouldn't be traumatized by, or vice versa. That's super interesting, I think. Okay. So we're going to read a little more. Oh, I don't think we have many questions, but to stay online with our schedule, usually every day at this time, I check questions, and there may be none. There are some. Fail fast, learn fast. Okay, everyone. When people ask you, what was class about today? Say, Mahatma Prabhu told us to go out and fail as much as we can today. They'll look at you like, huh? That's good teaching. You say something that doesn't seem to make sense in the beginning, you get their attention. Okay, so in a difficult situation, I got mad with Krishna because my service to him was being stopped by someone. I thought Krishna did not want me to serve him anymore. After that, whoa. I recovered my service, but another similar situation happened, and I realized how unjust I was thinking and how Maya wanted me to catch me. So by reading the Bhagavatam, where Bhrigu Muni put his feet on Krishna's chest, and he showed the biggest level of tolerance too, and also reading your statement, he is the one who loves us most, so we should not get mad at him. I realized how Maya can actually be very subtle in your mind. Yeah, subtle means you don't notice it. Yeah. Well, of course, we have to understand that for a conditioned soul to be mad at Krishna is normal, and therefore mad at everybody else. That's normal. And once you understand that it's normal, then you can start catching yourself doing normal things, which are actually not normal spiritually. My default go-to in reframing these kinds of things is, I don't know why Krishna is doing this, but there must be a reason. I have a story. Was this you, Anuradha, or was that someone from Facebook? Yeah. So I have a story. Maybe this will help you. There was a devotee. He was in charge of the Gurukula. And he wasn't taking the position like a guru for the kids. He was just, it was during Prabhupada's time. So he saw the kids like younger godbrothers. So he took the positions like the older godbrother, the uncle, not the guru. Even though Gurukula means the place of the guru. But Prabhupada was the guru. During Prabhupada's time, there were no gurus, only Prabhupada. Prabhupada was the guru. So one of his godbrothers said, the problem with the Gurukula is you're not taking the position of guru. You need to take the position of guru and discipline the kids. And he said, no, it's not what I'm going to do. It's not right. It's not what we should do. It's not my nature, etc. So they had a big argument. And he's saying, no, that's why the Gurukula is not working well, because you're not being guru. So then I think it was that day, the next day, this devotee gets called in by Prabhupada to his office. And Prabhupada said, so you think you're the guru? Like, what is going on, Anuradha? What is going on here? No, Prabhupada. Prabhupada puts his hand up like, I don't want to hear from you. You are not the guru. I am the guru. There is no other guru. You are not, like that. Just, yes, Prabhupada. And then later, that devotee said, I'm sorry I got you in trouble. I don't know what that devotee told Prabhupada. And so this devotee didn't know what to make of it, because he never thought that way. Now he's getting chastised. So it's one of those situations where you think, like, why is this happening, Krishna? Like, what's going on? And he said he later realized that actually Prabhupada was chastising the other devotee using him. Because there's a saying in Bengal or in India, if you want to chastise the daughter-in-law, you chastise the daughter. So the daughter-in-law sees, oh, in this house, you don't do this. So maybe the daughter didn't even do it, but the daughter-in-law did it, but she'll just to be easy on the daughter-in-law, she'll chastise. Don't you ever leave the dishes in the sink here again. This is for Krishna's plate. How could you do that? She's chastising the daughter, and the daughter-in-law's hearing it. So it's easier. So, what do you think in a situation like that? You have to be able to think, I don't know, but it's got to be something good. I just don't know what it is. It has to be. So whatever happens, we always have to think, okay, so, one thing Krishna was doing for you is he was increasing your meditation on the deity. You're probably always thinking of the deities, right? And how you want to serve them. Yeah. So like Narada Muni, Krishna leaves. Oh, why are you leaving me? Why are you leaving me? Because I want you to hanker after me. You saw me, you got an appetizer and there's no food to eat. So you'll be hankering after that meal the rest of your life. And in your next life, you'll get it. So, there could be so many reasons. I will, sometimes I travel and I go to a situation and there's a temple that's got problems and it's somehow they can't be solved. And the leader doesn't see the problem and he won't change. And we think like, Krishna, why are you doing this? And sometimes, at least I've seen, it's kind of becomes a lesson, because at a certain point that leader retires, and it's like we're very careful not to repeat the bad that leader did. It's like, don't ever do that again, because that was, so sometimes you need a bad example to know what not to do. Sometimes, hopefully we're smarter than that, but sometimes we're not. So that's the thinking, the favorable thinking. Okay, Krishna, why are you doing this? That's the idea, Never like, why are you doing this in a negative way, but what's the good, right? So Bharat said, yeah, I was thinking of hearing again. Yeah, you'd be surprised what happens when you hear again. You hear all the things. Did he actually say that? Is this the actual recording, or did they add that afterwards? Yeah. No, that is the actual recording. Okay. So we can read some more, because at this point, there's no more questions. So if you want to ask a question or make a comment, go for it. But I will continue reading, and then I will check the comments periodically. Okay. Now this part of this article is about Sangha, how everything we've read affects the Sangha. So the question is, what would help our Sangha communities develop in more emotionally honest ways? We need to work on relationships. Otherwise, our relational wounds are all going to be played out in the Sangha unconsciously. We all have that experience. You know, sometimes you say something to somebody, kind of an innocent thing, and they get upset, and you wonder, why would anybody get upset for what I just said? But it's, you know, we have a history, so there's some wounds there that play out. We need to recognize that everything we react to in others is a mirror of something we're not facing or acknowledging in ourselves. That's sometimes hard to accept. When we fault others, it's something that we're not admitting that we also do. These unconscious projections and reactions always become played out externally in groups. For instance, if I'm not able to own my own needs, then I will tend to dismiss others' needs and see them as a threat, because their neediness subconsciously reminds me of my own denied needs. So this is getting subtle. And this is all just information for all of you to ponder if this, how this relates to you. Then I will judge others and use some kind of dharma logic to make them wrong or make myself superior. Hridayanath Maharaj once said, sometimes a devotee may use Prabhupada's words as weapons of abuse, or somebody said it. So we know that can happen. If I'm trying to make you wrong for whatever reason, just because I want to make you wrong or I want to deny my own faults, and then that's one problem. But then if I go to Prabhupada's books and use his words to make you wrong, that's like a real big problem, isn't it? That's the danger of religion. Religious people can be weird. Have you noticed? Watch out for those religious people. They get weird sometimes. We want to be spiritual, but watch out for religious people, because then religion meaning you get hung up on rules and regulations, and then you can use those rules, regulations, and statements to mistreat, demean, harm, hurt others. And in worst case scenarios, to kill them in the name of God. So I doubt that will ever happen in the Krishna conscious movement. We haven't even come close to that. Well, we have come close. But it would not be an ordinary event. It would be extremely rare. But emotional abuse, using Shastra to emotionally abuse someone, that can happen. Now, one could argue, well, the spiritual master, his job is to emotionally abuse. Not exactly. His job is to emotionally abuse, but his job is to use words which will extricate the disciple from material entanglement. So sometimes a spiritual master will use heavy words. Have you noticed that? Not so much me, but sometimes Prabhupada, maybe it's my fault, I should be heavier. But sometimes Prabhupada will use heavy words because, and they could even be seen by some outsiders, that's abusive language, because we're stuck with some material attachment, and only those kinds of words will pull us away from that attachment, or we have some misconception, there's some ignorance, and there has to be a strong statement. Sometimes statements that are not strong, they just don't penetrate. We don't realize they're important. So sometimes the spiritual master will speak very strongly on borderline abusive language. You fool, rascal. Don't you have a brain? How could you do that? Especially you'll find if devotees have ever made offenses to the deities, Prabhupada would get very upset. Because that was one of Prabhupada's big worries, that he's brought Krishna and then Krishna will not be treated properly. He's brought Krishna to the temple, he'll be mistreated. So he wanted to make sure that that never happens. And if it did, he would be very upset. It's also personal because that's his lover, his friend is being not mistreated. But of course, in general, that was not Prabhupada's mood. So with less benevolence behind in someone's heart, they may use Prabhupada's words to control, to put down, to make people feel bad or whatever. And that we have to be careful of. All you religious people, be careful. Don't be too religious. Be spiritual. Okay. So what we just read, we had talked about on Monday, how dysfunction becomes most noticeable in relationships, either one-on-one relationships or relationships in groups. And sometimes you have a group and somebody in the group is always what we call in English a sourpuss. There's always something wrong. They're always complaining about something. Nothing's right. People misunderstand them. This is usually some problem that they have personally, and when it just exacerbates in a group, in group dynamics. So that's why it's important to be self-aware, to work on oneself, to improve oneself. One may have excessive needs for honor, appreciation, recognition. One may be lack trust in others, having been betrayed previously, and so on. And when you bring all that into group dynamics, it plays out. You don't trust anybody. You don't want to listen to anybody. You don't like authority. You can't work with others. People have to listen to you. And you can't work in a group that way. That destroys the group. It's dysfunctional. And also with one-on-one relationships, it comes up. So, I speak a lot about healing past traumas and difficulties in psychology. And sometimes I don't even like talking about it because it's like, let's talk more philosophy than psychology. But we know how important relationships are, both for our own advancement and both for spreading Krishna consciousness. And so these kinds of healings are necessary to have healthy relationships. And healthy relationships are essential. So that's one of the reasons that I talk about this a lot. And also because we've had problems, many problems in marriages. And this is another reason, because wounded people come together and then they wound one another. Wound one another. Say that fast. They wound one another. And that's what they do. And so healing is, they have to heal their wounds to have a good relationship. Otherwise, they may end up wounding their partner or further wounding their partner. Okay, so we'll continue. How can we become more conscious in our sanghas? We could start by recognizing the fact that spiritual communities are subject to the same group dynamics that every group is. In case you didn't know, these are, I think, obvious points, but sometimes we misunderstand that as human beings with physical bodies and minds, and the laws of group dynamics and psychology, they affect us as they affect everyone else. We've seen this practically. Now, as devotees, we have tools to better deal with it. Whether we use the tools is another question. But the obstacles to group dynamics are overcome by our Krishna consciousness and by our being healthy as individuals. But the group dynamics play. The hard truth is that spiritual practice often does not heal deep wounding in the area of love or translate into skillful communication or interpersonal attunement. That's the unfortunate reality, which we've talked about a lot, which we often think the spiritual life will heal that. Just the other day, I heard a devotee talking about this, and he said, well, my car needs an oil change. So what I've decided to do is chant extra rounds to my car. That should fix that. What do you think? Good idea? Anyone agree? Raise your hand if you agree that if your car has a problem, just chant more rounds to your car. It should fix it. Well, I guess if you had a lot of faith and you had some mystic power, maybe. But as a philosophical point, he was saying, in the same way, there may be some mental, emotional problem, and that the Maha Mantra is not going to deal with it. It wasn't created for that reason. So that's why we shouldn't, I don't want to say that the Maha Mantra won't heal many wounds. It will, but some it won't. And what was said, we just read, is something we see often, that if someone is, very introverted and not good with relationships, not open, not vulnerable, after becoming a devotee, it may not change. It might, depending on the sangha and the environment of the temple, but it may not in and of itself change because of the spiritual practice. And in some cases, it could get reinforced by the spiritual practice. Believe it or else. Believe it or else, you'll end up in Maya. Yeah. So that's something we have learned the hard way, but it seems not everyone has learned it yet. You could heal yourself physically by chanting, but we generally don't see that as the recommended way. I broke my foot, chant to your foot. Yeah, perhaps if your chanting is pure and your faith is high, it could work. I've heard stories like that. Prabhupada said that even. He said, if you fall and you chant Hare Krishna, you won't feel the pain. But as a general practice, if we're not on that level, that we can transcend that way or chant that purely, then we have to deal with other realities. And the question always comes up, well, how do you know? Well, you know because you know. You fall off your bike and you chant Hare Krishna and you can't walk and your knee hurts, as happened to me 3 years ago. So then you go to the orthopedics and he puts you on crutches and tells you what's wrong and puts you on physiotherapy. And you say, can I just chant to my knee? And he's like, I don't think so. Physiotherapy. So it's something like that. Simple like that, right? I wish we could chant to all our bodily parts and cure them. Sometimes I still do that. I'm testing it. If I get good results, I'll tell you. Group dynamics are especially difficult because they inevitably trigger people's relational wounds and reactivity. Recognizing this might help us work more skillfully with communication difficulties in the Sangha. Yeah, so now in ISKCON, we have courses on communication, empathic listening, leadership, relationships, all these things that we didn't have 30 years ago, because either, I can't say why, either we didn't think we needed them or we didn't notice we had problems. Or we didn't admit we had problems. I think it's more we didn't think we needed them, that the process itself would be sufficient. And it often is, but it often isn't. At least not for everyone in every situation. How can we work with that? That meaning the communication difficulties in Sangha. Being aware that we inevitably project our unconscious material on other group members would be a good start. Sometimes it's so difficult to be self-aware. Sometimes it's so difficult to not see that the problem is inside and just focus on the problem outside. The problem is you. You are the problem. Sometimes it's so difficult to realize, no, you're not the problem. It's the way I'm relating to you, the way I'm seeing, the way I'm projecting. Sometimes it's really hard to see that. Have you noticed that? But it's easier. It's actually, that's not a good question. Have you noticed that in other people? Because it's easy to see in other people. Have you noticed it in yourself? You might say, no, that's the problem. If your answer is no, I haven't noticed it in myself. Yeah, that's a problem. But it's much harder to notice in ourselves. It's easier to notice in other people. Have you noticed other people who get fixated on a problem and they don't realize they've been fixated on that problem for 2 years, like 24/7? Like there's something wrong with that. I think they call that obsession. It's a little obsessive, don't you think? Like every post you get from that on Facebook is about that problem for the last 2 years. That's not normal. Something's wrong. That person cannot be a healthy member unless they can process that problem in a healthy, balanced way and have the ability to see in themselves and ask, why am I so fixed on this problem? I know it's a problem. Why is this all I think about? Like, what's wrong? And putting people down who don't see the problem, putting people down who are on the other side of that. Like, we have to ask, if we were doing that, we'd have to ask, why am I doing that? Like, what is going on? Those kinds of questions are important to ask. What do you think? Yes, but have you ever noticed somebody doing that? And they're totally unaware that the problem is within. And so for good group dynamics, we have to recognize our own problems. And then we can say, I'm sorry, we can pay obeisances, ask for forgiveness and understanding, you know. I mean, even if other people do things wrong, our reaction is our reaction. We have to own that. Okay. We also need to learn how to speak with each other personally and honestly from our present experience instead of parroting teachings about what we think we should be experiencing. You know, sometimes we ask the question, how should I feel about this? To which my question is, how do you feel about it? So I understand the question because we're trying to navigate properly in the material world emotionally. So we want to know how we should feel. But by the time you ask the question, you've already felt it. So I don't think it's always a bad question. How should we feel? Sometimes it's a bad question because then it kind of borderlines this cultish idea that you don't know how to think and feel for yourself. You have to Tanya, how should I feel about this? You know, if someone saw me asking you, like, what's wrong with him? Why is he asking you? You know, whenever, you ask another person, how should I think? How should I feel? It's not bad. Sometimes it's genuine, but sometimes it is like you should know. Like you can think it, you can. So there's a balance there. So I think we can end here and prepare for japa. I'm not in Ecuador anymore. Yay, Haribo. So what do we want to do now? We want to end the recording and end the Facebook. And Gormani will come in and start everything, or we can start